"You missed a spot." She said it without looking up from her phone. "Right there, by the door. Do it again." Nobody in that building knew they were speaking to the woman who had already decided whether they still had a job. The morning started the way mornings in downtown Vancouver usually do in October, low clouds sitting heavy over the harbor. The kind of gray that makes the glass towers look like they belong underwater. Cars pulling into the parking structure off Burrard one after another. People walking fast, collars up, coffee in hand, not making eye contact with anyone. Nobody noticed the young woman who came through the side entrance carrying a mop bucket. Her name was Lena. She was 29. She wore a gray uniform 2 sizes too big, the kind that gets handed to you in a plastic bag at a staffing agency with no conversation attached. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, scuffed work boots. She walked with her head down, eyes moving slowly across everything, the way someone does when they are paying attention and do not want anyone to notice. Lena had graduated top of her cohort from the Sauder School of Business at UBC 4 years ago. After that, 2 years in Toronto at a supply chain consultancy that worked with mid-sized logistics companies across the country. Then 1 year in Calgary doing operational restructuring for a firm her mentor had recommended. She had turned down a senior manager position in Montreal last spring, and now she was here in a cleaning uniform, pushing a cart down the main corridor of Hartwell Pacific, a mid-sized freight and distribution company with offices in Vancouver, Edmonton, and Prince George. Her grandfather, Hartwell Pacific's founder, was stepping down after 34 years. He had built the company from a single leased warehouse in Burnaby in 1990. 240 employees now. Contracts with port authorities, retailers, and regional distributors. A reputation that had taken 3 decades to earn. He was handing it to Lena. But Lena had a condition. She had watched what happened to companies when a new leader arrived with no context. The polished town hall. The optimistic, all-staff email. The strategy deck that had no idea what the actual floor looked like. The people problems that never made it into any report, because nobody showed those to someone with a title. She told her grandfather she needed 60 days. No announcement, no introduction. Let her go in as a contract cleaner through an agency and find out what the company actually was. Not what it looked like in a board presentation. What it was when nobody important was watching. Her grandfather had been quiet on the phone for a long moment. Then he said, "Fine." That was 9 days ago. So far, Lena had learned 2 things. The logistics operation was efficient. The people running it were a different story. She was restocking the supply cart near the second-floor kitchen when she first encountered Petra. Petra was the senior director of client services. Mid-40s. The kind of person who walked into a room and immediately began rearranging the social furniture. She wore the same shade of deep burgundy every day in rotating combinations. She had the energy of someone who believed that her title was a personality trait. She stopped near the doorway and looked at the cart blocking the path. Then at Lena and then at the cart again, as though trying to determine which one was more of an inconvenience. "You missed a spot," she said. She pointed at the baseboard near the entrance without looking up from her phone. "Right there by the door, do it again." Lena looked at the baseboard. It was clean. She had just done it. "Of course," Lena said. "I'll get it." Petra did not acknowledge this. She was already walking away, heels clicking down the hallway, phone back at her face. 2 employees standing near the coffee machine watched. Neither said anything. One looked briefly at Lena, with an expression that was almost sympathy, and then looked away. The other kept talking about the Canucks. Lena cleaned the baseboard again. She took her time. She filed it away. The kitchen on the 3rd floor was where Lena got her real education. People ate lunch and forgot to perform. Or they didn't forget. They just didn't consider it necessary to perform for the cleaning staff. Either way, by day 4 she had learned more about the internal culture of the company in that kitchen than she would have found in 6 months of financial reports. On day 5, a group from the client accounts team settled near the window with their takeout containers. One of them, a man named Brody, glanced over at Lena as she wiped down the counter and said it the way people say things they want an audience for. "Agency sends us a different one every few weeks," he said. "Does anyone bother learning their names anymore?" A woman across from him laughed. "I didn't know we were supposed to." More laughter, easy, uncomplicated. The way cruelty sounds when it does not think of itself as cruelty. Lena kept moving the cloth in slow circles. Her jaw was tight, her face was neutral. The part that stayed with her was not the comment itself. It was how casual it was. How it required nothing from any of them. Like cracking a knuckle. Something done without thought, without weight, and forgotten before the container was even opened. She had been a subject of that kind of comment 5 times in 9 days. Every time she noted it. Not with anger. With clarity. Then there was Obinna. Obinna had been with Hartwell Pacific for 13 years. He was the longest-serving person in the facilities department. 61 years old. Quiet. Deliberate. A man who seemed to move through the building. The way water moves through a landscape, finding the path of least resistance. Not because he lacked force, but because he had learned. There was no point wasting it on things that didn't matter. Most people on the 2nd and 3rd floors did not know his name. They called him the facilities guy or the older one. Sometimes they didn't call him anything at all, just raised a hand in his general direction when something needed attention. The first morning Lena worked alongside him. He handed her a different cloth before she started on the elevator doors. "The ones they give you leave lint," he said simply. "Use this one." She thanked him. He nodded and went back to what he was doing. Over the following days, she watched him. He never complained. He never gossiped. He talked to the woman at the reception desk like they were old friends. And they were. She had been there almost as long as he had. He kept the shared supply room, organized in a system so intuitive that Lena figured it out in under a minute. He had clearly built it for anyone who came after him. On day 10, during the lunch break, Obinna offered her half of a container of jollof rice. "Made too much this morning," he said. He was looking at his phone, not at her. Lena took it. She ate it sitting on an upturned crate in the supply room. It was warm and smoky and careful in the way food is when someone has made it many times and knows exactly what it needs. She thought about the dinners she had expensed in client meetings. The wine lists she had navigated without looking at prices. The networking events where she had shaken 30 hands in an hour and remembered nothing about any of them. She could not think of a meal that had meant anything like this one. She looked at Obinna and thought, this man has given 13 years to this building, and this building has never once looked at him. That thought did not leave her. Day 13. It started with a tablet. The administrative team on the 3rd floor used shared tablets for client intake forms. One of them, a newer model assigned to the floor pool, went missing on a Wednesday afternoon. By 3 o'clock, the whole floor was unsettled. By 4, Petra was involved. Petra moved quickly when there was a public moment available. She gathered people near the main workstation and said, with the kind of certainty that does not invite questions, that she was fairly confident she knew what had happened. She had seen the facilities staff near the charging station that morning. She said the timing was suspicious. She said this was not the first time. Small items had gone missing when the contract cleaners were around. She did not have a single piece of evidence. She had a tone, and a floor full of people who were not going to push back on a senior director over a tablet. Obinna was filling the paper tray in the corner printer when she said it. He had come in between floors as he always did, working around the schedules of the people who needed the space. He set the paper down and turned around slowly. "I wasn't near the charging station today," he said. His voice was steady. "I was on this floor from 9 to 11, then downstairs. You can check the access log." Petra looked at him with an expression that landed somewhere between dismissal and impatience. "We'll let HR sort it out," she said. She had already turned away before she finished the sentence. HR was involved within the hour. Obinna was asked to come down to the office on the ground floor. His supervisor, a man who had eaten lunch with Obinna twice a week for the past 4 years, sat in the meeting and said nothing in his defense. He looked at the table. He said nothing. Obinna received a formal notice and was told to expect a follow-up process. He walked out of the HR office with his hands in his pockets and went back to the 4th floor and continued working. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He just picked up his cart and moved to the next section and kept going. Lena had been standing in the stairwell when he came out. She watched him walk past the door without seeing her. Her hand was flat against the wall. She stayed in the stairwell for a long time after he was gone. That evening, the building emptied the way it always did, floor by floor, the lights on timers shutting off one section at a time. Lena stayed. She went to the security office on the main floor and knocked. The overnight security officer was a woman named Sandra, who had said good morning to Lena every single day since she arrived, which put her in a very small category of people in the building. Lena asked if she could review the access and camera logs for the third floor from that morning. Sandra leaned back in her chair and looked at her for a moment. "You think he didn't do it?" Sandra said. "It wasn't a question. I think it's worth knowing what actually happened before anyone's name gets attached to something it shouldn't," Lena said. Sandra pulled up the logs. The access record showed Obinna on the third floor from 9:04 a.m. to 10:58 a.m. The charging station was on the opposite side of the floor from every room he'd logged entry into. The camera footage showed the tablet still in its dock at 11:15. Obinna had signed out at 11:02. The footage also showed Brody, the man from the client accounts team, picking the tablet up at 11:31 and walking toward the conference rooms, with it tucked under his arm. The tablet was not missing. It had been borrowed and not logged, which was against protocol, and had apparently been sitting in the small conference room on the fourth floor since midday, which was where someone found it at 5:45 p.m. and returned it to the dock without saying anything to anyone. Sandra saved the footage without Lena asking her to. Lena drove home along the Granville Bridge and did not turn on the radio. She sat at a light near Canby and looked at the river below and the city beyond it, the lights coming up in the towers, the orange haze above the mountains. She thought about Obinna on the fourth floor with a formal notice in his file. A notice that should never have existed. She had planned to stay the full 60 days. She had told herself she needed to see everything before she made any decisions. She thought about what Obinna's supervisor had not said in that HR office. She thought about what nobody had said. She thought about how easy it was, apparently, to say nothing. She was in the building the next morning at 7:30, not in the gray uniform. She drove in with her own car, a white Volvo that she parked in the visitors section near the front entrance. She wore a charcoal blazer and dark trousers and flat shoes. Her hair was down. She carried a slim folder and nothing else. The security guard at the front desk, a man named Theo, who had barely acknowledged her for 9 days, stood up when she came through the door. Word moves through buildings before people do. By the time Lena reached the second-floor boardroom, 17 people were seated. 3 more were filing in. Petra was among them, arriving with a coffee and the focused look of someone walking into a meeting they expected to run. She saw Lena at the front of the room and paused. Then she rearranged her face into professional warmth and extended her hand. "I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Petra, Senior Director of Client Services." Lena shook her hand once. "I know." Petra gave a small, practiced laugh. "Are you coming in from the parent company? I didn't see anything on the calendar." Lena did not answer immediately. She looked around the room in a slow, even way, taking stock. Not performing it, just doing it, the way you look at a space when you already know it. "Let's get started," she said. She opened the footage on the display monitor. No slide deck, no presentation, just the access log and the camera feed from the third floor. Timestamp 11:31. Brody walking away from the charging station with the tablet under his arm. Obinna already signed out 29 minutes earlier. The dock empty, and then not empty, and then empty again by 5:45. The room was very quiet. Lena spoke. "Yesterday afternoon, a man who has worked for this company for 13 years received a formal HR notice for the theft of company property." She paused. There was no evidence. There was no investigation. There was a senior leader with an assumption and a room full of people who did not say a single word. She let that sit. "I have been in this building for 14 days. Not as a consultant. Not as an auditor." She looked at Petra directly. "I was the one mopping the corridor outside your office. I was the one you sent back to redo the baseboard that was already clean. I was the one Brody and his team decided did not need a name." Petra's coffee was on the table in front of her. She had not touched it since Lena started speaking. "I came here because I needed to know what this company actually is," Lena continued. "My grandfather built Hartwell Pacific with a specific set of values that are printed on a placard in the lobby and apparently nowhere else. I needed to see whether those values existed past the front entrance, whether they showed up in the break room, Whether they showed up in an HR office when a man with 13 years of clean service and zero disciplinary history needed someone to say something. She looked around the table. What I found is that this building runs on two separate systems. One for people with titles, one for everyone else. And I found that some people in positions of authority have confused being in charge of something with being better than the people who maintain it. Petra opened her mouth. Lena raised one hand. Not aggressively. Just enough. Petra closed her mouth. Lena asked Sandra to bring Obinna up. He came in 2 minutes later, still in his work clothes, the cart parked somewhere in the hall. He looked around the room at all the faces turned toward him and stood the way he always stood. Quietly. Without pretense. Not sure yet what kind of room this was. Lena walked over and extended her hand. He shook it, and something in his face shifted slightly, a small recalibration, like a man who had prepared himself for one thing and found himself somewhere unexpected. 13 years, Lena said. On time every shift. The supply room organized so well that a stranger could walk in and figure it out in 60 seconds. The kind of work that holds a building together and gets treated like it's part of the furniture. She turned to the room. Effective immediately, Obinna moves into the role of Facilities Operations Manager. The notice issued yesterday is being removed from his file. Not suspended, removed, before he leaves this floor today. Obinna did not speak. He pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling briefly. His jaw moved. He nodded once, carefully, that was all. The room held the kind of silence that comes after something true has been said out loud in a place that was not used to it. After the meeting, Petra was asked to remain behind. Her employment was terminated before noon. Lena requested a brief conversation with her before she left the building. They sat across from each other in one of the smaller meeting rooms near the lobby. Petra's blazer was still on. Her posture was still straight, but the composure was different now. There was nothing left behind it. Lena spoke quietly. What you did to Obinna was wrong. Not just the accusation, the way you made it, in public. Without evidence. Banking on the fact that nobody would push back because of your title. You understood exactly what you were doing. Petra looked at the table. But this doesn't have to be the only thing that comes from today, Lena said. She set a card on the table. It had the name of a leadership coaching and professional development program on it. One that the company had funded for transitional situations in the past. There are people there who are good at helping people figure out what they actually want to build. Not what they want to control. Those aren't the same thing, and I think somewhere you know that. Petra looked at the card. She did not reach for it immediately. Then she did. She picked it up and held it. She did not thank Lena, but she did not set it back down. She stood. She smoothed her blazer with one hand and picked up her bag and walked out without turning around. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. There was no all-staff email about culture. No values workshop, no poster campaign. Lena did not make speeches. She just kept showing up. She knew which stairwell door stuck on the second floor. She knew the printer on 3 jammed specifically when printing jobs over 12 pages. She knew that the receptionist, whose name was Claudine, had a daughter who had just started at Simon Fraser. She knew these things because she had been in the building when she was nobody, and the knowledge had stuck. Now that she was someone, she used it the way her grandfather had always used what he knew. Not to demonstrate, not to impress, just to build. Obinna stopped her in the corridor on his 3rd week in the new role. He had a question about the supply ordering process, something practical, about lead times from their main vendor. They stood in the hall and talked through it for 12 minutes, just 2 people who worked in the same building, working through a problem. When he walked away, Lena thought about the container of jollof rice in the supply room on day 10. How little it had cost him, how much it had mattered. She thought about what it meant to lead a company built by someone who had understood that difference. 2 months later, Lena sat across from her grandfather in his office on the top floor. He was 79. He had gotten smaller in the way that some people get smaller. Not diminished, just distilled. The things that were not essential had simply fallen away. His eyes were the same as they had always been, watchful, steady. Well, he said. Lena thought for a moment before she answered. The infrastructure is solid. The port contracts are in good shape. The Edmonton office needs a proper operations review. I'll do that in January. She paused. The culture in this building had developed a gap between who people were when they thought they were being observed, and who they were when they thought they weren't. That gap is where most of the problems live. Her grandfather was quiet. He nodded slowly. And is it closing? It started, Lena said. That's different from closed, but it started. He looked at her for a long moment. And what did you do about the people who made it worse? Lena looked out the window. The harbor was flat and gray and calm below them. A cargo ship moved slowly toward the inlet. What you taught me to do, she said. Her grandfather made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and was quiet for a while. Ready? He asked. Lena looked at the building below. The corridor where she had re-cleaned, a baseboard that was already clean. The kitchen, where she had been the subject of someone's easy joke. The stairwell, where she had stood with her hand flat against the wall. I was ready the first morning, she said. They just didn't know it yet. What none of them knew, not Petra, not Brody, not anyone who had looked through Lena in those 14 days, was that Obinna had applied for a senior coordination role within the facilities department twice in the past 5 years. Both applications had been reviewed at the director level. Both had been marked as not meeting requirements. Both reviews had been signed off by Petra. Lena had found this in the HR system on her 3rd day as acting head of the company. She had not told anyone. Some things do not need to be announced to be made right. The person cleaning your building might already know more about it than you do. You cannot always know who is watching. But the better question is whether it should matter.